I welcome all our esteemed speakers to please join us on the stage for the session. I request Mr. Ashwath Ram, Chairman CII Cleaner Air Better Life Initiative and Co-Chair CII National Committee on Future Mobility and Battery Storage and Managing Director Cummins India to kindly initiate the discussion. Thank you. Wherever you're comfortable.
Yes, it's okay. We'll give it a minute. So good afternoon, everyone. Really excited to welcome you to this discussion and session on active and green mobility for all. I'm Ashwath Ram. I'm the chairman of the CII Cleaner Air Better Life initiative, and I'm also the co-chair on the CII National Committee for Future Mobility and Battery Storage. And I also happen to run a business which is probably causing a lot of this mobility pollution, a company called Cummins in India. So as I guess it's not new news to you that climate change is the existential crisis that we are facing today, and mobility is a major cause or major reason why some of these problems we have and that what we are facing. The United Nations, for example, in the new urban agenda UN 2016 and the 11th Sustainability Development Goal on sustainable cities and communities, calls for making cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And I guess that's what we are all here for, to look at mobility, look at green mobility, look at active mobility, and try to figure out how this can happen in a country like India, where there are so many other challenges. Mobility as a paradigm is fastly evolving. If 10 years ago somebody had said that a big chunk of two-wheelers around the world would all be electric, or that there would be over 2 million passenger cars, electric passenger cars being sold, people would have laughed and said, what are you talking about? Nothing, no, there's no infrastructure in place, nothing in place, how can it happen? At the same time, even in a country like India, where we have almost no lithium of our own, a big chunk of our buses, through government subsidies, through schemes like FAME, have gotten to be electric. And we are in the process of getting more and more of our electrical infrastructure in place. Big companies are making investments, the government is making investments, and what we are here today is to talk to some esteemed panel members who have a lot of experience from around the world on how this can actually happen. What is the journey towards sustainable mobility? What is the journey towards green mobility? What is the journey towards active mobilities in some of our cities? And how can we make that happen? The good news is that all the governments are interested and they've all signed up. They have signed up, Paris Accord, COP 20, so many different agreements made globally. But the net result is that the investment made by governments is still lagging significantly behind what their own commitments are. And in developing nations, it's lagging behind even further. And so, how do we prevent that the gap which happened between the West and developing countries does not happen as the transition to green mobility also happens? So, what are those ideas by which a country like India, like what happened with mobile phones, was able to leapfrog and catch up? How can we ensure that those kinds of transitions, what is the right path to make those transitions happen for a country like India is something which we hope to hear from some of our esteemed panelists. And so without further ado, I will talk about our panelists. We are going to have Mr. Sudhendu Sinha, who is the advisor on infrastructure, connectivity, and electric mobility from Niti Aayog. He is going to be our keynote speaker. Of course, he's running late, so he'll catch us up in the middle of our session. We have four amazing panelists. We have Mr. Mike Orgill, Head of Public Policy, Asia Pacific for Uber. We have Mr. Joe Phelan, Executive Director, Asia Pacific, World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We have Ms. Pramoda Gode, Lead Moving India for the World Economic Forum. And we have Mr. Kuldeep Sharma, Senior Energy Advisor, GIZ. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to invite each of them to say a few words, and then we'll start a Q&A kind of session where I'll be asking them a few questions. So can we start with you, Mike?
Hey, everybody. Are you able to hear me all right? Good. Well, thanks so much for inviting me to be here. It's such an important topic. At Uber, as one of the world's largest mobility platforms, we think a lot about this issue and think about the role that we could be playing here. One of our hypotheses is that shared mobility, or the idea that people are using the same vehicle in sort of a different way, is going to actually help to reduce car ownership. As we've seen in a number of different countries and cities, that when there's more usage of Uber, then actually you can see personal vehicle ownership decline. We can see things like parking spaces decline, et cetera. And we're undergoing a number of studies to see just how far we can push this. As we look at the overall scale of this problem, though, it's immense, and it's going to require contributions from across the industry, from governments and other players that are in this space. The mobility industry has become one of the larger contributors to CO2 emissions. We're now at about 15%, and it's grown rapidly, more rapidly than many other industries. And so it is really important that we start to figure out how we're going to solve this. From our position, we've made a commitment to be zero emission by 2040. This is going to be a really, really important transition for us. We believe that by 2040, everybody on the Uber platform will be either using a zero emission vehicle, they will be using public transit, or they will be using some form of micromobility. And we've undertaken a series of steps to get there around the world, including about $800 million of investment to make that transition and help our drivers to make that transition. And if we're successful, we should be able to be well ahead of the Paris Climate Agreement targets, which is ambitious, but we think is possible. As we look specifically at India, we've made a number of important announcements here. We announced one of the first of its kind and largest commitments to purchase and procure electric vehicles, 25,000 from Tata Motors to help get those electric vehicles on our platform. Secondly, we've launched Uber Green. It's first in Mumbai right now, so if you are traveling to or from the airport, you can book an Uber Green. It's been wildly successful. even from the first day, and we're excited about rolling that out to more and more cities across India. And finally, we're partnering with a number of fleets. We've recently announced partnerships with a couple of them to actually incentivize them to bring EVs on the platform. And we believe that this will be a good way for you to see more and more zero-emission vehicles on Uber here in India. As we look at the overall problem, though, we see that our drivers really do struggle to make that transition to EVs. And there's a couple issues at play. The first is that there's a lack of affordable vehicles. It's expensive. If you're an individual driver who's trying to make money for their family, it's very, very scary to go and buy an expensive vehicle and hope that you're going to be able to recover that cost. Secondly, there's a challenge around charging. For a driver who is driving for maybe up to 12 hours a day, the idea that they're going to need to constantly go and charge in a vehicle is scary, and that transition is going to be challenging for them if there's not appropriate charging infrastructure. And finally, as we look at sort of the macro problem, trying to find a way to bridge those sort of financial issues that are there. So how do you create the right incentives? Overall, we think that there's an appropriate role for government, industry, third parties to play around creating affordable EVs. We think there's an important role to play in terms of ensuring that there's affordable and accessible charging infrastructure, and finally looking at things like carbon road-based pricing. I'm confident that we've got a lot of great minds here that are able to solve the problems, but we're certainly committed to be part of that solution, and look forward to the rest of the discussion.
So thank you, Mike. So Mike very eloquently explained both the opportunities and the problems. So you heard him say that they are investing heavily. They are, the people are excited about using green mobility, but look at the counter side of it. There are a lot of challenges from an infrastructure perspective. The whole perspective of if I am a working user of a vehicle, where do I stop? Where do I charge? I earn my revenue when my cab is working. So if it can't be charged, if it can't work for that many hours when I'm working, how does my revenue come, and how does that business model then work? So these are the kinds of challenges which are out there, which together we are going to have to solve. I'd next like Joe to say a few words from his perspective.
Great, thank you, sir, and it's great to be here. My name is Joe Phelan. I'm with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We're a global community of more than 230 companies who work together collaboratively to avert the worst effects of the climate crisis, to tackle nature loss and mounting inequality. And we run platforms for our members to transform their businesses to be net zero, nature positive, more equitable, to work with whole ecosystems in their value chains, in mobility, in the built environment, in food and agriculture, materials, and in transport, to create systems change so that these systems become net zero, nature positive, and more equitable. And finally, we run platforms for our members to engage in this change that's going on in our financial and capital market system, so that the way that companies manage performance, measure and disclose on their ESG indicators, and do capital market engagement, and the way that valuation happens, so that that's transformed, so that ultimately finance flows to transformation, and the companies that get it right attract a lower cost of capital. So that's what we do, and I'm going to start today by making 3 points. I'm going to make 3 points. The first is that this transition in the transport mobility sector is well underway. The second is that emerging markets broadly are behind in this transition, but India has some unique strengths that it is leveraging. And thirdly, I'm going to share a little bit of the work that we're doing, our members are doing here in India, in the hope that you can make suggestions and offer support that can help us to go further, faster, and that you'll take inspiration and knowledge from our work, to help you in your journey to accelerate this transition. So first of all, this transition is underway. Transport mobility has been totally changed, not least by our friend here from Uber, but looking at decarbonization of mobility now for businesses is not just about managing your climate risks. It's absolutely about business survival and core commercial strategy. In Europe last year, 1 in 5 of every car sold was an electric vehicle. In the US, EV sales went up by 55%. So this, this is changing fast and getting faster. And I mentioned that emerging markets and developing economies are a bit further behind. So in 2040, more than half of all the internal combustion engine vehicles sold in the world will be in emerging markets. And that's going to result in 46% more ICEs as a share of on-road traffic in 2040 than with developed economies. And that means locking in uncompetitiveness, locking in high CO2 footprints into the logistics of the products that you manufacture for export, locking in bad air, and locking in an uncompetitive economy. So it's really important to make that change. Secondly, I said, India does have some real strengths to build on. So, I think the first is that the government has set and been reasonably clear in the direction and quite ambitious too. And, over the last 5 years, there's been some correction with some of these ambition statements, but the through line has been very consistent. They've also been extremely open to dialogue, not only with OEMs, but with the whole transport value chain. And they've been really open to dialogue to understand where their policies are working and where they're not working, why, and how they can be strengthened. And that's really commendable. I think the second strength is this burgeoning ecosystem in the new mobility space. So from charging and infra to new OEMs to the fleet management and the data side of it. So, really strong ecosystem. And then the third strength, I think, linking all of this together, has been a fantastic spirit of cooperation and collaboration. It feels like everyone is wanting to build this market together. And that's been really reflected also on the traditional commercial and industrial side, where there's a very strong demand for them as users to switch to zero-emission vehicles. So, really strong foundations to build on and accelerate. Let me lastly just say a little bit about the work that we're doing. So, recognizing this challenge with emerging markets and developing economies, WBCSD, the UK government and the US government together launched the ZEV Emerging Markets Initiative to accelerate deployment of zero-emission vehicles in some key emerging markets. The first partnership was launched this year in India with the government of India, and that's focused on increasing adoption on the CNI side of ZEVs. And we had an incredible achievement with partners like WEF, WRI, the Smart Freight Center, and others, where the appetite from industry was so strong that there's already been commitment to buy almost 8,000 ZEV trucks in 2030. That is 0.5% of the demand that's needed in 2030 of medium-duty vehicles and more than 1% of the demand of heavy-duty vehicles. It's an amazing achievement in just a few months, but also it shows, how much further we've got to go. And so we really want to partner with other companies, other institutions to push this further faster. Secondly, this partnership is working to accelerate private investment, especially on the production and technology side. And thirdly, this partnership is supporting data sharing across industry of mobility patterns to support better investments and more progress. So I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for clarifying and also elaborating all the progress that is being made by different governments, especially from an India perspective on moving forward with zero-emission vehicles. So thank you for your statements there. I'd now like to invite Pramoda, who has significant infrastructure experience on how to set up infrastructure. She's done it in multiple parts of the world, and now she's doing it in India as well. I'd like to hear her perspective on how this space is moving.
Thank you, Mr. Ashwath. First of all, I commend CII for curating this session on mobility. I think that comes from the understanding that solving for mobility is a very interdisciplinary issue. It has aspects of it from the manufacturing and automotive ecosystem. It has aspects that run into energy, It has aspects that go into clean technologies, emerging technologies, and also goes all the way down to service providers. So as World Economic Forum, we see immense opportunity for public-private collaborations that are required to solve this problem. And that's our angle into which we're working. I lead the initiative called Moving India, which, as it describes, it's about moving India more efficiently. I think today what I want to reflect upon is taking one step out of the conversation that we're also focused on, is electrifying road transport. But what we're here to discuss not just electrifying it, but making it more sustainable and greener for everybody as well, right? So what does active mobility to me mean from my 2 decades of experience is something that provides options to everybody, the elderly, the children, those with disabilities, those who come from low-income backgrounds, an opportunity to give them choice, right? So that is what active and green mobility for all should look like. And how we should think of it is to reimagine this problem, reimagine our cities, right? Roads are, the biggest public spaces, the biggest asset that we have, and we fail to think of them as an opportunity to rethink this paradigm. And that's what we need to do. And I think everybody has a role to play, as a corporate, as a government, as a policymaker, as an individual as well. There is a huge opportunity that we all need to think and shift this idea. And the reason that we need to do that is obviously for sustainability, but also along with that comes an opportunity for the individual to improve their health as well, as we, the more people on the roads, more physical activity everybody gets is obviously helpful for everyone. More importantly, it also helps with the vitality of the neighborhood, brings down crime rates, just improves the whole economy. So there are areas that we don't directly think about, which will just help about in how we can create a better life for all of us. And one thing is electrification of the road transport or any transport vehicles is just one opportunity or one channel through which we can get through. Although my initiative itself is about electrification of road transport, but I think we, as corporates, there is great opportunity for you to think about where else you can influence. And I won't get into the depth of that right now. I just wanted to share some of the work that we've been doing, which might be relevant for you, is we are working, we constantly must be hearing that there is a supply issue from electric vehicles. So what we are trying to do is work with the subnational governments to strengthen their manufacturing policy so that the supply side is answered. Then once the supply is there, the financing of those vehicles becomes a concern. So we're also working on the financing of electric vehicles. And then once we get those into the economic value chain, we also need to start thinking about the end of life, the sustainability of those vehicles, the circularity, the battery recycling. So we're also thinking about that. And as Joe was mentioning, we're partnered together with a few other knowledge partners and NGOs to signal the first demand for medium and heavy-duty electric trucks in India, which is an initiative of Niti Aayog. So we're all working closely together to signal the demand so that the entire ecosystem comes forward and makes it a reality. Thanks, Ashwin.
Thank you, Pramoda. I'd now like to invite Mr. Kuldeep Sharma to say a few words.
Thank you, sir. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to participate and say a few words and also represent some of the good work that we have been doing with the Government of India. So, introduction, my name is Kuldeep Sharma. I am the project manager and team leader for e-mobility projects at GIZ. A little bit about GIZ, maybe some of you already know and some of you have been introduced also to several initiatives of GIZ. It's called German Development Cooperation, and we work with Government of India ministries on shared objectives, shared learnings, and initiatives wherever Government of India needs support. It's a bilateral cooperation, so the topics are decided mutually. So my fellow panel members and also sir talked about a rapid increase in number of e-vehicles that are being sold, and also the targets and the market development for 2030 and beyond, and also the net zero targets by 2070. Okay, the number of EVs are coming on the road, but we see the other problem as well, other side of the problem. And the other side is, how do we make our cities more livable? How do we ensure that there is inclusive infrastructure development? Pramodha talked about a little bit in terms of how do we make cities more cycling friendly? How do we make cities more friendly for footpaths that people are able to walk, and the development is actually also friendly for all kinds of citizens. Yeah, we have to also ensure that there are not too many emissions coming up. So that is part of active mobility. That's how we see it. And from the green mobility side, we also have some initiatives where we are working with Niti Aayog, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. We are also working with Ministry of Heavy Industries, where we are developing pathways. How do we decarbonize transport? How do we do strategies for decarbonization of transport? And what are the sustainable methods that can be adopted by cities while developing the city's e-mobility action plans? So these are some of the activities that GIZ is supporting and working with the Government of India and also the state governments. Now, coming to the, the key highlights that are basically needed. So the infrastructure development and the policy level support for the cities, the public awareness programs. So GIZ has been doing some of the initiatives such as Cycling Kochi, which has seen a huge success. And also we have recently announced the Green and Urban Mobility Partnership with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, where more than 50 cities have signed up to do the inclusive development of the infrastructure. And under this initiative, we have basically four main key components that we'll be working on. One component is on supporting our partner institutions, how to do the capacity building. Then there is second component, which is on peer-to-peer learning and on data exchange. And third component is about how do we do, let's say, the city mobility action plan. So what are the what are the guiding principles to do the inclusive development? And WBCSD has recently launched also CII-ITC. There also we are collaborating with WBCSD in working with some of the states, how we can have proper city mobility action plans. And yeah, that would be it. And from the GIZ side, the key thematic areas that we work on is basically public transport, active mobility, looking at alternative fuels, and public awareness. Thank you.
Thank you, Kuldeep. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump straight into a few questions. And the first question I have for you, Mike, is what role do you believe technology and innovation will play in driving widespread adoption of active and green mobility choices?
It's a great question. I think about it in a couple ways. The first is around technology will oftentimes have a significant impact on price. And so as the technology of something improves, we see the cost of things go down. And as we look at some of the big gaps that exist today in a place like India, is that the cost of a zero emission vehicle is just frankly going to be greater than the cost of an internal combustion engine. But what you're starting to see is that as the technology improves, and we see this in my home country in the US, that it's now starting to get to a point where the total cost of ownership of an electric vehicle is starting to reach parity with internal combustion engines in the fuel costs. And so as the technology improves, we're going to see those costs come down. The other thing that I think will be really interesting as we look at technology is just sort of how we're able to use data to make more informed decisions. So where should we put charging infrastructure? How can we do better traffic management so that cars are most efficiently moving to the places that they need to go? How are we designing cities so that they're more livable and that we're able to have people access the place that they're trying to get to? And so I think as we think about technology, it's the efficiency and it's the cost that are really going to make a difference. And it's going to require investments in technology from corporates. It's going to require subsidies from governments. It's going to require academics to really sort of think about new technologies that we haven't even fully considered yet. So lots of bright opportunities there.
So thank you, Mike. And as Pramoda was saying, that it's not a 1-0 game. It's not just electrification or nothing at all, right? There are so many choices where innovation is happening around the world. So whether it be making the existing internal combustion engines greener, using alternative fuels like biodiesel, bio-CNG, CNG and LNG, combination of fuels, using hydrogen in internal combustion engines. So there's a whole series of areas where innovation is happening in mobility as far as different options are concerned. So it's not yet clear around the world that there's no one answer. Just a few years ago, everyone thought that lithium ion was going to be the leading technology as far as batteries is concerned. And now almost the whole mobility market has gone to LFP. So similarly, huge amounts of R&D and money is being pumped in by different governments as well as by corporations to try to advance the technology in each of the technical areas. And so, you will see the landscape changing pretty significantly as we go along. My next question is for Joe. Joe, from your global experience, what's the business case for sustainable mobility and how can it be strengthened?
Thank you very much. And to reflect on your point, this transition's underway, but the way that it takes shape is always informed by the context of each country. And India has a unique context. Perhaps there's a lot more agricultural waste here to support biofuels, for example. But when we look at the business case and financing options, there are some really intrinsic benefits in electrification. So, so just on the use side, there are big opportunities to unlock value in electrification where you get hubs, either consumer hubs around shopping centers or big employee campuses, or on the manufacturing side and logistically, where you can link renewable energy with the energy management system for the building and electric vehicles. Suddenly you can build commercial cases for adoption of EVs much earlier than you would be just by looking at EVs alone, because the electrification piece, comes into play. I think what's already happening but needs to be scaled up is very close collaboration between business, finance, and government. And it's very important, again, on the adoption side, that there are payment guarantee mechanisms, and also that the government continues to develop policies that support adoption, like the FAME policies that have been developed. It's also absolutely crucial that the manufacturing is localized and that production and technology development happens in India. Currently, India's manufacturing capacity is very limited, but batteries represent 35 to 40% of the cost of an EV. So it's really important that more of that is done in India to bring down the cost and make the economics work. I've just got a few data points which I'm going to check my notes on, but I think the first thing is that EV battery manufacturers will require 2,400 acres in India to accommodate the manufacture of 200 gigawatt hours of batteries by 2030. That will allow the production of 4 million four-wheelers and 23 million two-wheelers. So this takes a lot of planning now and a lot of cooperation to see it through. Also, the government does need to keep strengthening production-linked incentive schemes. And there are many technologies, but currently auto manufacturing in India is more than 40% of all the manufacturing jobs in India. The world is transitioning away from ICEs, so it's important that India captures some of that share of the global manufacturing in the new auto system that's developing. So it's a really important area for investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. My next question is for Pramoda. What do you see as the role of corporates in sustainable mobility?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think there is a huge role that corporates can play. I think they can, within their organizations itself, create that precedence and start signaling to the government that more needs to be done in this space, right? So it can be something as simple as setting up an information desk in your organizations, which can tell new employees how to get to the nearest transit station, right? It can tell them if there is, showers at your organization or at your facilities for bikers or for others who are using a more active mode to come to the office premises. It can be a little bit more involved, right? You can start regulating parking, or you can start offering an incentive which is equal to the parking benefit that you're giving to most of your consumers. Like, why do we give, a free slot to park a car for 8 hours, but not offer somebody who's taking the bus a bus pass? I don't know of any corporates in India. Maybe I'm not as knowledgeable as what the corporate policies are, but I don't think that's a standard. Why don't we do that, right? I mean, it's very simple. Either avail this or avail 10,000 rupees coupon, or for a gym membership or anything like that, right? Even our certifications, right? I mean, CII certification, the IGBC certification for green buildings has, a placeholder to provide cycling infrastructure, parking for, cycles, or, designated parkings for electric vehicles, already inbuilt infrastructure for charging, showers for cyclers or bikers. Why don't we promote them? Why don't we do this? And these are not huge things. You don't need a landscape to be changed completely. This is something that you can do at your own level. So it can take various forms, right? You can do employee matching for carpool programs. That has internationally shown a lot of, and you can have partners like Uber who can help you with that, right? And you can use technology to make that happen. Or if employees are already doing carpools, there's large residential facilities where people usually live, carpool, and come into the societies. You can offer a guaranteed ride back home, because it's usually disaggregated when people leave offices. So there's a lot of small things in terms of corporate ambition, corporate leadership that all corporates from India can do, and that will start signaling to the government that there is actually a lot of interest from the employers and the employees to take up active and green mobility initiatives or opportunities as well.
Thank you, Pramoda. So, Kuldeep, my next question is for you, and it's often opined by many folks that India, from an overall, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is so low in the totem pole that we have so many fundamental needs to be met that, talking about green mobility, etc., seems to be very far-fetched and almost ridiculous that we should even talk about these kinds of things. What, according to you, what approaches can we take as a country as we think about this to raise awareness and sensitivity regarding active and green mobility?
Thank you, sir, for the question. And as you said rightly, we are focusing on green mobility. We are promoting EVs. We are supporting also research and development and also the private sector. But again, I would come back to my initial speech. You also need to think about the inclusive development. You have to consider the cities part. You have to consider the citizens' requirements. You have to have cycle paths. You have to have footpaths. You have to think about all the citizens in the city, not just moving the people who are in the car. And thanks, Pramoda, also for highlighting the initiatives that can be taken for promoting the public transport. Also, doing certain initiatives at the corporate level. I mean, in terms of main strategies or main requirements, we do need to focus on infrastructure development, which is inclusive. So making sure there are enough cycling paths, making sure there is enough public charging infrastructure available, so that people do not worry about the range. And also making sure that the public utilities such as power distribution companies, they do not struggle with the planning phase, making sure the city authorities, they do not struggle in terms of planning their cities and making sure that the cities are actually healthy and livable and sustainable. Yeah. In terms of coming to the question, in terms of creating the public awareness, there could also be several initiatives which can be driven by the state departments and the city authorities. But first of all, there has to be a collaborative approach for this. There has to be a collaboration between the government and the private sector and also the city authorities, that they together can have certain initiatives, those initiatives that can educate the citizens in regards to uses of green and active mobility. And there has to be public awareness campaigns, there has to be cycling campaigns that can be organized, and there has to be the corporate funded or corporate driven initiatives that can be promoted. So these could be the strategies that we need to take in order to promote active and green mobility in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Kuldeep. Next.
Swith, if I may
Yeah, of
add
course,
to that,
please.
Just to keep it more lively. So one experience or one that I would like to share with everybody, and it's a very old experiment borrowing from the United States, but when Kuldeep was talking about addressing the needs of the citizens, this example came to my mind, and I'm going to share it with you. And if you've already heard of it, then that's just check your email. So back in 2009, 2010, the mayor of New York, at that time, Janet Sadiq Khan had, under the aegis of Mayor Bloomberg, initiated the rethink of the entire Times Square. Everybody has seen the billboards around Times Square, the craziness, back from the 90s, the movies that we used to see about the craziness associated with it, the billboards associated with it. And that situation has been the same for the 1960s, 1970s, but they really needed to think out of the box and solve that situation. So what they did was they used temporary infrastructure, just cordoned off the entire lanes, Broadway, for about a quarter mile, and then just put in lawn chairs, which they just bought at the spot from hardware stores. And within minutes, people started flocking and sitting in those chairs. And the response to that was immense. And everybody, without wondering what would happen to the traffic just distributed itself. That's the beauty of traffic. If you build more flyovers, the more traffic will come. If you close off more roads, it'll distribute itself accordingly. So that's a very, very great thing about traffic. So what ensued was a complete rethink of the entire New York City. They started doing dedicated bus lanes, car turn lanes, bike facilities. Now I think New York has about 200 miles of bike lanes. And although the biking has become 4 times, the number of fatalities has remained the same for biking. So it's become overall a safe place for everybody, with pedestrians, the motorists, and everything like that. So, and these sort of ideas have been discussed, for Connaught Place, which is right around the corner here, right? And then there is a lot of inertia from the businesses. But through this experiment is also what we've seen is many flagship stores opened in New York. In Times Square, people are spending more time on foot. People have spaces to sit that they can let their spouses go and shop and come back. So the entire economic district actually benefited. So these are the kinds of lessons and I think ideas that we all need to support. So just wanted to share that.
No, that's great. Thank you, Pramoda, for sharing some practical examples of how people have made things work. So next question is for Mike. How can business work together with communities and local authorities to address the gaps in energy supply infrastructure and scale for green mobility solutions?
Another good question. You're coming with all the hits. I think that it's really important for businesses to come early to governments. I've worked with governments representing corporates for a long time now, and typically what happens is that governments see a need, and then they devise a solution, and then the businesses say, oh, that's unworkable. And everybody tries to kind of figure out how to work around that, and it's not super effective. When it works really well, businesses show up early to the governments, and governments consult the businesses and sort of talk about more holistically, how can we solve the problems that we all have together? I'll give one example of a discussion that needs to be happening more. It's around charging infrastructure. One of the things that we're starting to do is go to local governments and say, hey, in many parts of the world, we have a really good understanding of where commercial vehicles are going. We have a great map of when they're moving, where they're stopping, and that should give you a really, really strong indicator of where charging infrastructure is needed. And we can actually provide that to governments as they're trying to figure out where they want to build that. And working with a number of cities all over the world to actually build that out. And then secondly, that doesn't really solve the problem, right? That's a good first step, but you also need to bring other players into it. So who are the people that are actually building the charging infrastructure? We need to be able to get that data into the system as well. Because if you're imagine if you're an Uber driver and you're driving around and your battery says 10%, and you say, okay, well, I've got the map that says that there's a charging station there, and you pull up and there's 10 cars in front of you, you're stuck. Your day is shot, right? You're not driving anymore. You're not taking the money home to your family in the way that you wanted. And so it's really important to make sure that we have all the different bits and pieces of the ecosystem coming together. And so businesses have to show up, governments have to be asking and consulting. But I think absent businesses being proactive, we're going to end up in that sort of terrible cycle that we've seen a million times where government, well-intentioned, puts together a policy, doesn't work, businesses complain. And so I think that, I've got some optimism here as well that businesses are doing the right thing in this particular place, but there needs to be more of it.
Thank you, Mike. My next question, again, is for Joe. As you know, even the most successful green energy-based mobility companies have taken billions from the public and from the markets, and very few of them have actually made any money. Even a company like Tesla, which is the most successful EV company, has just recently started making money. So finance is an absolute critical aspect of scaling and adopting green mobility. So from your perspective, what are the approaches Indian industry can pursue to hedge these, high loss kind of risks and associated with green mobility solutions and still get started and, plunge into getting into this space?
Thank you. So maybe, I think BYD are doing pretty well. More famous people have a different model, but I think BYD have demonstrated there's a very strong business case for this shift. I think what I'd like to do, with your permission, is actually build on what Mike was saying about the importance of businesses coming early. This is a room of businesses. And also take inspiration from something that Pramoda said to me in the green room, which I found very inspiring, where she said, we have to ask for the change we want. And I would just say to all of us here, I know that some of you in this room are working on this shift in your companies, and I know that some of you will not be. But this is an agenda to address now. This is not an agenda to keep an eye on and see what's coming down the line. I was in this room 10 years ago when BMW were talking about e-vehicles. Then it was an issue to keep an eye on. It's no longer the case. So, really, there's a very big opportunity for all of us right now, and a responsibility also for us to look into what our company can do, look into what our company is doing. When we're already leading, which some of you are, find ways to collaborate with others. And I want to build on this point Mike was saying about data, and Uber has a huge amount of data which it can bring to help. Last year, our members did a lot of work on the freight side to share data, and what they found was that by mapping freight movement, you can reduce emissions by 15%, and crucially, you can reduce the need for charging stations, the number of charging stations, by 25%. So there's huge opportunities for us, when we collaborate. So at the moment, we're doing some modeling, and our intention as members is to make a really strong case in India for a national data sharing platform across all modalities, from the active to the personal to the industrial. That's just one example of what we can achieve when we, take ownership and accountability and really, push today on what your company can do and what you can do with others. So I just encourage everybody, to take that away and, work with whichever partner is right for you to make it a success. Thank you.
So thank you, Joe. So Pramoda, back to you. From your global experiences, what are the major challenges and gaps in active and green mobility in India? And how can we turn these kinds of challenges into opportunities?
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that. I think, as rightly said, there is, and I was talking to Joe also, is that there is a great challenge. But as a nation, I think we are very agile. And I think we need to use that as to our advantage and be iterative in this process, because there is no clear pathway in terms of technology, roadmap, and how to get there. There are certainly certain things from global experiences that we can adopt, especially when conversation on financing is coming. There is the institutional financing, which is one concern, one aspect, but there's consumer financing as well. So both of these need to be worked on. And in terms of what specific role corporates can play is we need to have newer business models to be able to make this, especially when it comes to the case of EVs. It can be just, changing your procurement guidelines a little bit to give preference for maybe green mobility providers, right? And then, so that will set up a huge aspect, and you will give a huge advantage for new LSPs who are bringing in EVs onto their fleets. And it could be also just giving longer term contracts to these, instead of doing like a 1-year contract, you do a longer contract, which makes the entire solution more bankable. And then financing is easier to bring in. So certainly, whatever work we're doing on freight electrification, especially in terms of the bringing on more commercial EVs onto the fleets, and fleets here is really important because they're the ones who are bringing in scale, right? And they're the ones who are electrifying the maximum number of kilometers right now. It's not you and I who are driving 15 kilometers to work every day, right? It's the the fleet 2-wheelers or 3-wheelers who are driving the 120, 150 kilometers. So that's where we need to electrify. So I think these are kind of the learnings that we need to take, right? I mean, everybody can't influence the policy roadmap of the nation, right? What we can do this is to rethink how to make it more easier for these innovators to sell their products to us. How can we support them? So I think that should be the general line of thinking.
Thank you, Pramoda. Kuldeep, from your experience, what should be the top priorities for Indian cities to effectively integrate active and green mobility into their urban planning strategies?
Thank you, sir, for the question. So to ensure active and green mobility, we need to have a holistic approach. We need to have collaboration between governments and private sector and corporates and city planners, city authorities, and we have to have, a collaboration where everybody is working jointly for the common objective. But to have, let's say, to count 3 main priorities, one is definitely the infrastructure development. We have to have infrastructure development which is inclusive, which is considering the needs of the citizens. It is equitable, it is accessible to everyone, so equitable access of infrastructure. And then coming to the e-mobility side, on the infrastructure side development, definitely there's a need for reducing the cost of EVs, making them more and more affordable, having public charging infrastructure so that there are no range anxiety issues, there is Then coming to the second priority is the policy level support. So implementing all these plans, developing all these city mobility action plans, but then at the end there has to be policy backing and promoting cycling, promoting healthy and sustainable cities development. There you need the policy support. And third, I would say again the collaboration where you have to have you have to have partnerships between the governments and the private sector, and they are working for the common goal. There has to be collaborations for research and development in the EV sector. So these are the 3 main priorities, I would say, which are needed for ensuring green and active mobility for all in India. Thank you.
Thank you, Kuldeep. So I'm done with my questions, and what I'd like to do now is throw it open to those of you in the audience. If you have any questions for our panel members, I think we have a few minutes, so we'll be glad to take any questions. Can we give her a mic, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. I am from Dana, India, and my question is related to the supply chain issues that we face in the mobility industry. I would just like to give an example. So whenever we move to any advancement in mobility industry, we face raw material issues because handling the supply chain issues is a big concern. So, and then we come across the cost implications also, the rigidity that we face from the smaller enterprises. So how would you suggest to tackle that?
Who would like to answer that?
I think you're totally right that it's not just the large OEMs or the established players that need to be thinking about this. And we've been constantly saying this to the subnational governments and the national governments that through this energy transition, the whole MSME sector has to be supported. And that just doesn't mean that we talk about it like at such events, but they need hand-holding. They need to know how to train, skill their workforce. They need to know how to outfit their factories. They need to know what products they need and when they need to produce those. They need a pipeline. So there is a lot of hand-holding that needs to happen, and it's not a one-time thing. It's going to have to happen through at least a decade or two until this entire transition is going to happen. So what is the overall strategy that we are seeing is that the anchor companies, right, whether it be the Mahindras or whether it be the Tatas or anybody else, are taking the lead on that, and they are working with their existing partners to transition them. And then while we bring more EVs and products on there, the same kind of transition will happen, or there'll be onboarding more players. But the idea is to enable the existing. We don't want those loss of those jobs, right? We want to upskill them so that they can earn more and everybody can benefit from it. So I think that's something that everybody realizes, and work has begun. We need to continue working on that, however. That's a great challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Gentlemen, okay, you can go next.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Daniel from Bricks India. So, see, there are a lot of supply issues for batteries. I understand there's safety issues are also coming up. So, is there any plans for the government to initiate some sort of a R&D and expertise in indigenous developments of batteries? That's one thing. And what is the reality of, what will be the percentage of vehicles in India, say 10 years time frame, where it will be electrified and remaining will be IC engines? And what is your idea on that?
So I guess I can try and answer that. I think the government is already setting up national safety testing laboratories to test the standards as well as define the standards on battery safety. There is a lot of work required on the development of batteries from India, from that perspective. And I think that's why the battery PLI schemes are coming in to put the capital in to build the base batteries in India as well. So it's going to take time, because as of today in India, pretty much 100% of all the batteries are imported. The core cells are imported from China as of today, and they have all the infrastructure, and we haven't really developed that infrastructure. So it's going to take some time for us to be able to develop that infrastructure. The last question was regarding penetration. I think it's anybody's guess, but the way at least some of the studies I've read state that two-wheelers and small three-wheelers will probably move faster, and by 2040 should see at least greater than 50% transition to battery-based mobility. Passenger cars will be, vehicles will be next, and at least the estimate I saw was somewhere between 25 to 30% by 2040. Of course, light commercial vehicles is probably and buses is probably the next space which will see a larger transition to batteries is at least what the current thinking is. But usually most people are wrong, and it moves faster than what people think, and it moves in areas where you can't predict. A lot of it depends on how the breakthroughs and innovation in technology happen. Yeah,
Add to that, I think I have this problem today, talking too much. But just to add to what Sir was saying is that the initial 5% of adoption is considered to be the one which is the most difficult, and after that, the scale at which the growth occurs is very, very rapid. And already geographies like Delhi have come to 12% of adoption in EVs. But yes, that is dominated by 2 and 3 wheelers. So I think overall, I think it's the same answer, is that we don't know what is going to be the exact curve. Nobody can predict that. And always when you forecast anything, it's best to do it in ranges, right? So I always think of it like showing up like a funnel kind of a thing on the graph. So there is a range. So that range is, I think, what overall everybody agrees on. The exact trajectory, I think, no, it's very difficult to forecast. On the battery safety point of view, I think it was those initial teething issues that unfortunately we all had to face. I think right at this exact moment, there is a conversation at the Ashok Hotel with Underwriter Laboratories that is happening on battery safety standards. So there is a lot of work, a lot of progress that's being made right now. So I think we can look forward to good technical specifications and in India as well.
Great. So we'll take the last question, the gentleman on that table there.
Hi, my name is Anup. I come from EAC Euroasia Consulting, which is a boutique management consulting firm. And my question is to Mr. Orgil. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate you. I just read somewhere that you've done about 4.5 billion kilometers of Ubering in India in 2022. So congratulations on that. My question comes mainly on the battery infrastructure side of things. So, and what Ms. Gode just pointed out, that shared mobility is the space or wherein there is maximum traction going to happen, at least on the four-wheeler side. Uber is one of the first companies to come in Mumbai from an e-mobility perspective, or having e-taxis, to say the least. But there is a restriction of movement of these electric vehicles within Mumbai as well. So you're doing about 20 kilometers radius. That's what Uber is actually covering today. Beyond that, it is not a possibility. For a city like Mumbai, which is far more expansive than that, it becomes a restrictive thing. Now, when we look at an average Uber driver probably is doing about 300 odd kilometers at max in a day, if I can say that, which talks about one charging in a day. So is Uber really looking, and obviously this would require a business case evaluation, but is Uber really looking at trying to minimize the cost of investment from the Uber driver by looking at not buying the entire vehicle, but providing vehicles without the battery, and looking at battery as a service rather than battery as part of the vehicle in itself? Maybe tying up with municipal corporations, or also corporates that are spread across, so that you can create a complete grid of battery swapping stations within a city.
I think right now we're kind of agnostic on the exact approaches to get more EVs out there. So we're trying a lot of different things. So we've partnered with companies like Gogoro in Taiwan, which is well known for its battery swapping technology, and helping to scale with them both in Taiwan and beyond. We're trying a number of different things. You mentioned sort of limiting the range. We're trying things with financing partners to see if we can bring down the cost for individual drivers. And a big bet for us here is really the fleets that we're working with, because they're able to access capital in a way that an individual driver can't, and they can sort of aggregate the risk for those payments across all the different drivers. And so I wouldn't rule out the kind of solution that you're talking about, where you sort of offer sort of battery as a service, but right now we're really trying everything to see kind of what sticks, and we're starting to see that different things work in different markets in different ways. So obviously Uber Green, as you mentioned in Mumbai, that's just the start for us. Hopefully, in a matter of years, it's not just limited to those airport trips, that smaller radius, but really is to the greater city and also to more and more cities around the country. Thanks.
So thank you. So I'd like to thank my fellow partners in crime here, Pramoda, Mike, Joe, and Kuldeep, for an exciting session where I hope we gave you a flavor for where mobility and active mobility is heading. I think we are at an inflection point. We are just starting to see this really take off. So it's a very exciting space for everyone. And I want to thank all of you as the audience. You are fully, engrossed and participative in this discussion. So thank you very much. And yeah, watch out for this space. There's lots more ahead and excitement happening here. So thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, with this, we conclude the session. We extend our heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed guests for the insightful discussion. I kindly request all our speakers to gather for a group photograph. But then there would be a problem. We will just stand here.